The fluorescent lights of Riverside General Hospital hummed faintly, casting a sterile glow across the empty corridor. Midnight had long passed, yet the building still pulsed with quiet life. The rhythmic beeping of heart monitors, the distant echo of hurried footsteps, and the faint smell of antiseptic that never seemed to fade. But tonight, something felt different. The air was heavier, almost holding its breath. Dr. Edward Hale, head of surgery, stepped out of the operating room, peeling off his gloves. His face was calm, his movements precise, every gesture rehearsed from years of discipline. He had just saved a life. Again. Around him, nurses whispered in admiration, their voices carrying that familiar mix of respect and fear. Edward didn't notice. He didn't need to. Praise had become routine. He walked toward his office, coat slung over his shoulder, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on him. He thought about his schedule, another back-to-back shift, another list of patients who couldn't afford mistakes. To him, medicine wasn't about compassion anymore. It was about control, perfection, reputation. But just as he reached the glass doors leading out, a sound shattered the quiet. A heavy, uneven shuffle, followed by a thud. Edward turned. There, under the harsh fluorescent light, stood an old man in torn clothes. His face was pale, his hair unkempt, his hands trembling as they clutched his chest. He looked like he hadn't eaten in days. Every breath came out as a wheeze, every movement strained against invisible pain. A nurse rushed forward instinctively, but Edward's sharp voice cut through the air. "Wait, who is he?" The nurse hesitated. "He just came in off the street, sir. Says he needs help." Edward frowned. "At this hour?" "We're not a shelter. Direct him to the city clinic." The old man staggered closer, eyes glistening with desperation. "Please, I just need a few minutes," he gasped, his voice fragile but filled with pleading humanity. "My chest. It feels like it's tearing apart." Edward's jaw tightened. He could already hear the judgmental whispers forming around him, that the great Dr. Hale was wasting time on a vagrant. "Get security," he said flatly. "We have real patients to treat." The old man coughed violently, blood spotting his lips. He reached out a trembling hand. You once saved my son." The words sliced through the sterile air like a blade. Edward froze. His brows furrowed. For a moment, confusion flickered across his face. The kind that comes when the past knocks unexpectedly on your door. "What did you say?" he asked quietly. The man tried to speak again, but his strength gave way. He collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. His words were broken, barely audible. "You saved my son." Years ago, Edward blinked. His mind scrambled through memories, hundreds of surgeries, countless faces. Could it be true? But pride pushed the thought away. "I've saved many sons," he muttered, signaling security with a flick of his hand. Two guards approached, lifting the frail man by his arms. His eyes, cloudy but still burning with a strange kind of recognition, met Edward's one last time. "I thought you were different," the man whispered. The automatic doors hissed open. The cold night wind rushed in as they dragged him out into the darkness. The sound of the doors closing echoed like a final heartbeat. Silence returned. But something inside Edward didn't feel right. He stared at the spot where the man had fallen, a faint smear of blood on the spotless tiles. For the first time in years, his composure cracked. His hands, once steady, trembled slightly. He turned away, muttering under his breath, "I did the right thing." "Didn't I?" No one answered. That night, Edward drove home through the empty city. Streetlights blurred past his windshield, casting fleeting shadows over his face. Inside his luxury apartment, the air was warm, the view spectacular, glass walls overlooking a sleeping skyline. Awards lined the shelves, each one a reminder of his brilliance. But tonight, they seemed to stare back at him, accusingly silent. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, but even that burned differently. The man's words echoed again. "You once saved my son." He tried to push them away, switching on the television for distraction. But every channel seemed to show stories of suffering, the sick, the poor, the forgotten. He turned it off. The silence felt louder. He walked to his window, looking out at the city lights below. Somewhere out there, that man was wandering, maybe dying, while Edward stood in comfort. A gnawing unease crept into his chest. He whispered to himself, "Why do I care?" He was just another lost cause. But the lie didn't sit right. Sleep refused to come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the man's trembling hand reaching toward him. He could almost hear the rasp in his voice. "You once saved my son." The clock ticked past 3 a.m. Edward lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling something he hadn't felt in years: guilt. Morning came, gray and cold. He made coffee, hoping to shake off the unease. His phone buzzed on the counter. First one notification, then another, then dozens. Confused, he unlocked it, and there it was. Every news channel, every feed, every headline screamed the same words: retired firefighter, dies after hospital refuses him treatment. Edward's cup slipped from his hand. Shattering on the floor, he read on, each line cutting deeper. The man had once saved dozens of people from a downtown explosion. And then, Edward's eyes froze on a photo attached to the article. An old news clip showing himself shaking the firefighter's hand years ago at an award ceremony. The caption read, "Dr. Edward Hale honors hero Thomas Avery for saving lives." His body went cold. The room spun around him. The man he turned away wasn't just anyone. It was a hero, a man who once saved his own son's life. Edward sank into his chair, eyes wide, heart pounding. The screen glared back at him, merciless and bright, and at that moment, the great Dr. Edward Hale, the man who believed he was untouchable, realized what true failure looked like. But the story was far from over. The hospital corridors were colder that morning, but maybe it wasn't the air. Maybe it was him. Dr. Edward Hale stood frozen in the staff lounge, the television flickering in front of him. The news anchor spoke in calm, rehearsed tones, but the words cut through him like knives. Retired firefighter Thomas Avery found dead after being refused treatment at Riverside General. On screen, a photo of the homeless man appeared, frail, weathered, but unmistakable. Edward's own voice trembled as he whispered, "Thomas Avery?" Then the screen changed, an image from years ago, the hospital's gala night. Edward shaking Thomas's hand, both smiling proudly beneath a banner that read, "Honoring Local Heroes." His heart seemed to stop. He remembered the day vividly now. The smell of burning wood, the orange glow of the fire, the chaos, and the firefighter who ran in when everyone else ran out. That man was Thomas Avery, and he had saved Edward's son. The memory came flooding back. The moment firefighters carried out his boy, limp and covered in ash. Edward remembered falling to his knees, begging, crying. And Thomas, soot-covered, exhausted, handing him the child and saying, "He's breathing. You're lucky, doctor." Now that same man had died outside his hospital's doors, and Edward was the one who had refused to open them. He sank into a chair, gripping his hair, his breath shallow and shaking. Around him, staff whispered in disbelief. Someone muttered, "He was a hero. I can't believe this happened here." Another voice added, "People are protesting outside, sir." Reporters, too. Edward didn't answer. The world around him blurred, the walls, the voices, the noise, all drowned beneath the echo of his conscience. "You once saved my son." He rushed out of the room, ignoring the cameras gathering at the hospital entrance. His mind was a storm. Shame, guilt, disbelief, all crashing against each other. As he drove, his reflection in the rearview mirror stared back like a stranger. The man who prided himself on saving lives had just destroyed one that mattered most. But where had Thomas lived? Who had he become? And why hadn't anyone known he was that man, that hero? Edward needed to know. He started his search at the city morgue. But the clerk only gave him an address scribbled on a note. Old Mission Shelter? 12th Street. When he arrived, the place was almost silent. A cracked bell hung over the wooden doors, and a nun greeted him with tired eyes. "You're looking for Thomas, aren't you?" she said softly, as if she already knew. Edward nodded. His voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, please. I just need to understand." She led him into a small, dimly lit room. The scent of old paper and candle wax filled the air. On a rickety shelf sat a cardboard box labeled with Thomas's name. The nun set it down gently in front of him. Inside were a few worn belongings: a half-broken medal, an old photograph of a smiling young firefighter, and a folded piece of paper that had yellowed with time. Edward unfolded it carefully. It was a child's drawing. A stick figure with a stethoscope, standing next to a firefighter. Beneath it, scrawled in uneven handwriting, "My hero, Dr. Hale." Edward's throat closed. Tears blurred his vision. He turned the paper over and found another, a letter written in shaky handwriting. Dear Dr. Hale, you once called me a hero, but I always thought you were the real one. I never forgot that day. The way you thanked me, the way you looked at your son when he woke up. I used to tell people, that doctor, he reminded me that kindness still exists. I hope you're still saving lives, my friend. If we ever meet again, maybe it'll be my turn to thank you. Edward's hand trembled. He pressed the letter to his chest, tears streaming freely now. Thomas had never forgotten him. Not even after the world forgot Thomas. The nun placed a hand on his shoulder. He always spoke kindly of you, doctor. Even when he lost his home, even when his health began to fail, he still said he was grateful. He said you inspired him. Edward couldn't speak. He simply nodded, his entire body shaking with regret. That night, Edward didn't go home. Instead, he sat in the chapel beside Thomas's small memorial, a single photo, a candle flickering beside it. The light danced across Edward's face as he whispered, "You saved my son, and I couldn't save you." But then something changed in his eyes, a quiet resolve, the kind that only comes when a man has nothing left but a chance to make things right. The next morning, he stood before his hospital staff, hundreds of eyes watching, waiting, judging. Cameras pointed toward him again, but this time he didn't hide. His voice was steady, raw, honest. Thomas Avery came to us for help, he began, his tone heavy with remorse. And we turned him away. I turned him away. He was a hero, a man who once saved my family. And I let him die. The room was silent. Not even the hum of the machines dared to interrupt. But that ends today, he continued. From this moment on, this hospital will open its doors to everyone, no matter who they are, where they're from, or what they look like. He looked up at the sign above the reception desk, Riverside General Hospital, and his voice softened. We failed one man, but we will not fail another. Days later, banners went up around the city. The Avery Project, free medical care for the homeless. Edward stood outside the hospital at dawn, watching the first patients arrive. No cameras, no applause, just quiet purpose. The sky was calm, painted in soft gold. He looked up, clutching Thomas's medal in his palm. For the first time in years, the world didn't feel cold. It felt clear, but deep down, one question lingered. Would forgiveness ever come?